Okay, hello. My name is Devon McCormick, and the chapter I'll be lecturing for is Chapter 17 Biopsychology of Emotion, Stress, and Health. Fear, the Dark Side of Emotion. So, to start up, we're going to talk about evolutionary emotion. First, we will go into what are emotions. And emotions are a complex experience that is associated with physiological responses, subjective feelings, and behavioral changes. Now, we'll go over the two main theories of emotion that was discussed in the chapter. First, we'll be going over the James Lange theory, where emotions are a response of a physiological response to a stimuli. The example I used is crying makes you feel sad. In comparison, we have the Cannon-Broad theory. The physiological response and the emotional experience occurs independently but also happens simultaneously. And the example for that is we cry and feel sad at the same time. Then we will go over the evolutionary purpose of fear, which fear has been used evolutionarily to prepare the body quickly against threats, known as a flight or fight reaction. Next, we'll go over the fear of the brain. First, I want to touch on the image in the top right corner. This is basically discussing the different parts of the brain and that we'll be discussing and where they're located. We have the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. First, we'll be discussing the amygdala. This part of the brain is responsible for processing and learning fear. Once a neutral stimuli is linked to a fearful event, the amygdala remembers the experience so it can pose future threats. The amygdala is basically the brain's central hub for processing and learning fear, and this process is known as fear conditioning. Um, and then next, we'll be going over the prefrontal cortex, which analyzes the threat that has been posed by the amygdala to determine if a threat is real and controls the fear level, and it will control the level of intensity because the amygdala analyzes that there is a fear, but the prefrontal cortex will determine how your body reacts to the fear in terms of how intense they react to it. Will they be very frightened or just a lower tier? So then we have the hypothalamus, where information about the fearful event from the amygdala is given in order to remember where and when it happened. The hypothalamus is more of like a cognitive map and a mental note regarding the environment, and it is left to determine whether the situation is dangerous or safe. So next, we'll be going over the fear pathways. First, we have the high road, which is a slower, more detailed path that will transfer sensory information into the thalamus and then to the cortex. And like I previously mentioned, it's a slower response, but it is more accurate. And then you have the low road. It's a fast, direct pathway to the thalamus through the thalamus to the amygdala, which is a faster response but less accurate. Okay, then we're going to go over stress and how the body reacts to it. So, the biological definition of stress is the body's physiological and psychological response to stressors. So, now we'll go over the APA axis. First, we'll go over the hypothalamus. This releases CRH, which is a response to stress. Then we'll go over the pituitary gland, which is stimulated by the SRH to release ACTH. Next, we have the adrenal gland, which is stimulated by the ACTH to release cortisol. Lastly, we'll go over cortisol, which is used to help the body react to a threat. However, we have learned throughout this chapter that if you release too much cortisol in a short period of time, it could cause damage to the body, including blood sugar and a weaker immune system. Okay, and this is we will connect fear to the foundation of biopsychology. So, in connection to chapter 17, I connected it back to chapter 1 of the textbook. We went over the basic biological factors of how humans behave and how process emotions and how they process emotions. It's this chapter supports the feeling of fear and how our body responds to it, and is the direct correlation to the physiological processes that are in chapter 1 and how the brain is structured. And here are some of the definitions from chapter 1 that could correlate to chapter 17. First, we have the neuropsychology, which controls the way our brain processes our emotions and how damage within the brain can impact our ability to control. Then we have the psychophysiology. This is where the study of human physiological responses when dealing with stress. And then we have the cognitive neuroscience. This view which parts of the brain are activated when a person faces fear. And just to add context to it, if certain parts of the brain are damaged, they may respond to fear differently than other people as well. So we know that fear is activated, but it's just specifically which part of the brain to tell how exactly or how intense they will respond to fear. Next, we have our peer review article, Stress Beliefs Effects on the Biological Response to Stress. So it went over how stress is defined as a response to perceived threats to our emotions and behavioral, like how to our emotions and behaviors. And it also emphasized what we've been saying before, how chronic stress could damage the body and result to a number of mental and physical illnesses. Some that were mentioned earlier were higher blood sugar and weaker immune systems. So there's a correlation between the two. In this study, the theory of whether or not the intervention groups negative stress beliefs would decrease. So, to add context, negative stress beliefs have been proven to be the cause of the chronic stress and the damages that come along with it, like lower blood sugar, weaker immune system, and just other mental issues. So, in this study, as we will see, we'll talk more on in the methods. In this study, we're going to see if the intervention group can provide a lower stress beliefs than the control group. So, in the methods, we see that 77 adults were assigned to either an experimental or a placebo control group randomly, where the trier-social stress test was introduced. Self-reported stress was measured before and after the manipulation took place, which was done 4 times. Cortisol levels and heart rate was also measured. So, in this slide, first, I want to touch on the 2 images that are shown. I will first touch on the first image in the top right corner of negative stress beliefs. As we see in the beginning, the levels between the control group and the intervention group are kind of parallel with each other. They're pretty similar, but as time goes on, we see a significant decrease in the intervention group, and the negative stress beliefs go down a lot in comparison, whereas the control groups pretty much stay the same, which shows that the theory of the research question was kind of accurate, that negative stress beliefs can be decreased. And we're also going to see how that correlates with the level of stress, like how negative stress beliefs being decreased can correlate with the negative levels of stress as well. So in the second image, we see that over in a more extended period of time, once we hit 50 to 110 minutes, we see that the intervention group shows another decrease in the levels of stress, which also correlates that having negative stress beliefs can not only reduce the chances of having chronic stress, but it also can alleviate current stress that you may be having. In this study also, the intervention group was also shown to score higher in stress recovery. So, Throughout this chapter, we learned how our body responds to stress and how factors such as rising cortisol levels can make the effects of stress worse for your body. And with that taken into consideration, this study further examined the extent of the damages of stress can have on our body based on how we perceive it. So, throughout the chapter, we discussed how fear and how fear can have fear and how our body reacts to it. But in this study, we can see how our body reacts to stress and how our stress levels, how our negative stress beliefs can actually help us cope with our stress. And that'll be it.